What is the most painful thing someone has ever told you? Serious. Part 1. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. I could honestly give a whole list, but really the hardest thing that someone had ever told me is what I remember as a teenager. I had been struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts, and I just felt so lonely. I had really loved this one girl, although I had been stuck in the friend zone, but we both shared a mutual friend who had killed themselves. I tried to be supportive for her, but she didn't accept it. Until at her funeral she had came up to me and told me, "I wish it was you instead of her," during the peak of my depression and suicidal thoughts, as well as this coming from someone I had such strong feelings for. I struggled to find any worth in my life after that. Even today, the only person in the whole world who has consistently been there is my best friend, when everyone else turned their back on me. Finding value is hard. I am a city bus driver. With very good intentions, I once informed a homeless woman of where she could get free showers in the city as she smelled horribly of feces. I thought I was helping her. She informed me very calmly that she chose to live in filth and smell that way because it was the only thing that kept her from being raped every night. Nothing has ever crushed me like learning that has. That is the reality of many homeless women. I've heard two inhumanly painful things in my life, and I hope I never listen to anything mildly like that again. Your sister tried to kill herself last night. She's in the hospital right now. My mom, about a year ago. I just can't do this anymore. I want to die as soon as possible and forget about my problems. My girlfriend, about a month and a half ago. Both are better now, fortunately. Although, GF is still fighting depression and anxiety, but I'm there for her whatever she needs. My grandmother, who practically raised me, crying saying she'd give her life for me to just be okay and not have my problems. Either that or when I stormed out of the house and driving around after a huge argument, breakdown on my part, and she called me asking me to come back saying, "Who on this earth loves you more than Abuela?" Killed me because I realized no one will ever love me the way she does. I've been having severe mental issues since I was like 10 years old, and my problems don't really have a cure, so that cut deep. All my grandparents want is for me to be happy, and that's the only thing I can't give them. Backstory. While I was still with my ex, our sex life was horrible. I could barely maintain an erection and she would get upset at me. Sex stressed me out so much that I started using Viagra. Didn't help much. There was a point where she sat me down and told me that unless I fulfilled 3 conditions in a month, she would break up with me. The kicker is that she did not tell me what those 3 conditions were. It was my first long-term relationship and I really thought I loved her, so I was willing to do anything and everything for her. Anyways, that month was absolutely horrendous and I've never been in a worse state emotionally. I never learned what those conditions were, but our relationship limped along. Fast forward to 2 years later. We had broken up but still spoke occasionally. Went for a drive with her just to discuss a few things, and I brought up that 3-condition scenario and told her how badly it affected me. We had never spoken about it since it happened. Her response: "You know, I don't really remember doing that." And in that exact moment, I realized that I had been emotionally abused for years without knowing. My dad saying, "No one ever wanted you, but I took you in anyway." It was the last voicemail he left me before he died from ODing in November. He was referring to when my little sister and I were put into foster care, and we eventually chose to live with him, rather than my mother. He was a recovering addict, alcoholic, so we thought things would be better. As an adult, I put him in rehab and helped him get back on his feet. Went into massive credit card debt to help him, paid his way in life, and let him live with me. When we lost the apartment and I had to move in a friend, I did everything I could to keep him safe, for years. Even though he had his problems, I always loved my dad and always will. But for that to be the final thing I heard him say, it broke a part of me. Sorry for the long message. I moved out at 18 after high school. I was raised by boomers who instilled in me the notion of, if you need help, you haven't done enough. My roommate died at work and I was left to pay all the rent and bills on our crummy 2-bedroom apartment alone. Hard to do even then when my minimum wage job paid $6.50 an hour. After months of barely making it and racking up debt due to misplaced pride, I had lunch with my mom. I laid everything on the table and started to choke up when I got to the part where I asked for help. I told her I didn't want money, and that I was about to be homeless. She thought for the briefest of moments and said, "That's too bad. Let me know how that turns out." I slept under a bridge for 3 months in order to save enough to clear my debts. All the while my old bedroom sat empty with my old futon gathering dust. My stepmom was really abusive growing up. When I was 12 to 13, she found a lighter in my backpack and started freaking out because she couldn't find any drugs. I found a Zippo walking home and was just playing with it, thought it was cool. My dad started hitting me with a belt while she gleefully described how I was going to get raped in prison with a broom handle. It horrifies me that she's a school principal. I lived with my grandparents after parents divorced. I was in 4th grade, got back from a long weekend camping trip with the Boy Scouts. Grandma wanted to hang out and watch TV since I had been gone. I said no and went out to see a movie with a friend and his mom instead. When I got back she was already in bed, so I just went to bed. I was woken up at 4 in the morning by my mom telling me that grandma is gone. I walked into her bedroom and the only words my grandpa said to me were, "She's so cold," as he was holding her hand crying his eyes out. I was so fucked up by this BC I brushed her off to go see a movie. I'm 28 now and it is still on my mind weekly. The next instance is when my grandpa had surgery and he never got out of bed after BC, he was just too weak. After that he was in hospice at home. I was supposed to spend the night but decided I wanted to go home and be in my own bed. The next morning I get a call from my brother sounding very sad. All he said was grandpa passed away last night. These 2 moments will stick with me forever. They cause me great pain any time I see someone's grandparents or hear or a loss. Moral of the story: hang out with your loved ones. Talk to them. Listen to them. Be with them. It'll make the day when they are no longer there a little more bearable. My father told me that no one was ever gonna love me. I was never going to get a job, or get into college because I had a shitty personality and no interests. I was 15. I was experiencing chronic depression for the first time ever and had no idea why I was feeling what I was feeling and even less of a clue as to how to manage it on top of just being an angsty teenager whose parents never provided a stable home for. That conversation definitely helped. It made me experience having suicidal thoughts for the first time. Thanks, Dad. I fostered kittens for the past 3 years, about 70 kittens total. The very first litter we ever got was just a group of 4 and I immediately fell in love with one of them who I named Spot because of the big black spot on the back of his head. I was in high school at the time and persistently begged my mother to let me adopt him, but she persistently said no. My heart would break when we would take him back to shelter, thinking it was the last time I'd see him, but twice he was the only one sent back because he had a new health issue. Upper respiratory infection or just a stomach problem, minor things that kept him around me. Spot had been with us for so long that I thought I might have a chance at convincing my mom. He even bonded with one of our cats and cuddled with him all the time. One night, he very abruptly had no interest in eating or playing. Those are both notoriously bad signs for a lot of serious problems. The next day, we took him to the shelter. We were at first told he come up negative for every test and that we should give it time, but a tech came in right as we were about to leave and said he'd tested positive for something. The shelter owner's face dropped and she asked us to come with her into a private room. Spot had leukemia. We were offered one last night with him, but he would need to be put down, and the longer he was alive, he was at risk of seizure. We immediately decided it had to be done that day. My mom admitted to me as we cried and said goodbye to him that she was planning on having us keep him after all this time. I told him I loved him, kissed his Spot, and left. This was the most crushing experience of my life, but it does have something of a happy ending. I aggressively bugged my mom to call the shelter and see if we could have him cremated and keep his ashes with us, so that he'd still be with us and in our family forever, and she eventually contacted them and got a yes. Now Spot's right next to the ashes of our old cats and I have a clay piece with an imprint of his paw. It's very bittersweet. When I was a freshman in high school, a sophomore I didn't even know came up to me and said, "Hey cutie," to me sarcastically. His friend who was standing nearby and overheard him approached him, not realizing he was being sarcastic, and asked him, "Dude, what are you doing? She's ugly." Not one but 2 boys I had crushes on made fun of and harassed me when I was in 5th and 7th grade. One of them teased his friend about the indignity of having to sit next to me on the bus. The other threw things at me with his friends, also on the bus. I'm 38 and these memories still haunt me. I will always see an ugly little girl looking back at me in the mirror. No amount of therapy changes that. Yeesh, I didn't anticipate how triggering it would be to recount these memories in so much detail. Off to have a good cry. I was close friends with a guy for about 3 years and then dated him for a year. Ex-boyfriend was one of those people who always spoke honestly, even if it was a shitty thing to say. Relationship got fairly shitty, abusive for the second half. Once we broke up, we had some space from each other and then started hanging out in a group again. During one of these meetups, we were all drinking. I cannot remember how the conversation got to this point, but my ex goes to say something and then stops himself. This had never happened before, and so all of us were curious to know what thought had entered his brain that was so bad even he stopped himself. Turns out the dude hadn't been sexually attracted to me ever, both as a friend and as a girlfriend. But he realized we got along well and wanted to have a girlfriend, start having sex. So he had trained himself to find me attractive by using Pavlov's methods. He did psychology at university, to condition his brain to link me and sex, orgasming. I got the fuck out of there and haven't spoken to him since. Still don't know why that fact was the last straw for my brain compared to the abuse. Tuesday morning I was told that my geriatric dog was not likely to last the week, and we needed to consider euthanasia. Tuesday evening we scheduled the appointment for today, Thursday, in the afternoon, so we could have one last day with Poochie. Overnight and through early Wednesday morning she took a turn for the worse, and the appointment was moved up. My best girl, my cuddle buddy, crossed the Rainbow Bridge at 4 p.m. yesterday, a full 24 hours before I thought to say goodbye to her. She was 16 years old, my silly sweetheart, and I loved her for every single day of it. I was holding her as she died. She's in a better place now. No more pain. It was the right thing to let her go. I still wish she were here with me. This is a too fair from both sides. My dad was a military officer and at the time was in charge of an ROTC unit at a university. There were not bases nearby, so he was the ranking officer in the area. A new recruit, not related to the ROTC unit, just a young airman, died in training, and it was my dad's job to inform the family. It turns out another brother had applied to the academy, and it was also my dad's job to tell families they were accepted. So when my dad showed up, they naturally assumed it was about him. They were so excited to see him at the door. Easily the most heartbreaking story I've heard. Last year I had to tell my dad that my sister passed away on the same day my mom had a stroke and was in the hospital. COVID restrictions were in full effect and no visits were allowed to my mom. He had to hold that information for 2 weeks before my mom was released. Life can be cruel and ugly and awful. Be sure to hug your loved ones and don't leave things unsaid. My mom telling me that me moving to the other side of the country was going to be another one of my mistakes that I would regret. I didn't regret almost anything I had done in my life and was really hurt by her thinking my life was full of mistakes. I asked someone I was in love with and thought I was in a pretty good relationship with if we could celebrate our 1-year anniversary of starting dating, and he answered no because it was just supposed to be a fling and not something to celebrate. I've never felt lower or less important in my life. My father called me a slut when I told him my grandfather, his father, was sexually abusing me. I was 12 at this time, abused aged 3 to 9, and didn't know what slut meant. One of the strongest memories I have is looking up that word in dictionary. Those tears were hard to cry. Edit. Oh my goodness, thanks for all the love and support. I want to let anyone concerned know that I'm okay. For the most part, I'm not going to lie, my life has been incredibly difficult. I'm in therapy, currently seeing a new psychotherapist. I also have postnatal depression after birth of my daughter. It brought up a lot of memories, but I'm lucky in that I've had help through my GP, therapists, and some good people around that care. Also had a lot of shit people around, but I'm a lot more selective who I let in these days. My grandfather was sentenced to prison in 2009. An aunt found naked photos of myself and 2 of my cousins. Police investigation took 3 years and he actively blamed us for wanting sexual activity from him. Police were disgusted by what came out of his mouth in defense. Gave a DVD statement and police found lots of evidence including pornographic poetry he had written about watching me perform ballet. Along with photos of myself and cousins naked and tied to chairs. It's very likely that photos are in the dark web and it's possible that others were involved too, but I couldn't give much info to police about a man and woman that also abused me with my grandfather in a back of a van. Turned up for court to be cross-examined and he changed plea to guilty on side of me. He died a few years after getting out of prison. Unmarked grave cause he knew I'd want to piss on it. Relationship with my father has been difficult. A few guessed correctly that he was also a victim of sexual abuse but by his twin brother instead. My grandfather had also raped his daughter and his wife, and it shouldn't have been a shock to anyone that he also abused us kids, but this was the 1980s and it was taboo to even say the word rape. After police investigation, my dad put a shotgun to his chin. He is a farmer, so that's why we had one. He took the gun to police next day as he feared he would kill himself. It took long time, but I have forgiven both my parents for not believing or supporting me until police found evidence. I have dark days, but mostly I'm okay. Sorry if I upset or concerned anybody. I've been homeless, picked abusive boyfriends, have dental phobia as having someone put their fingers in my mouth and touch my gums is most traumatic for me, so I have a lot of dental issues but have seen dental specialist, learnt meditation techniques, had hypnotherapy to get through it. I'm struggled, but I've fought and found my ways to cope with a very small group of friends and my daughter, who is the most amazing angel ever. Thank you XX. There's two. The first one is that my dad told me that he would have preferred that I didn't exist, that I was the last kid and dragging him down and in the way, and he wished I had died when I was born. I was a 13-year-old girl when he said this to me. I really struggle with self-worth now, especially because I'm physically disabled with neuropathic pain and I feel like a huge burden to literally everyone in my life. The second is an art teacher who I really looked up to as a teen. She took me aside and simply said, "Briar, you remind me of the worst version of my younger self. You need to just calm down and stop. You disturb the other girls in the class and this is why they don't want to work with you. Could you at least try and be normal for once?" I was always extremely passionate and a bit loud and inattentive in class. This is because I was a girl with undiagnosed ADHD and I had a bunch of weird interests. I honestly thought this teacher liked me and it completely destroyed my self-esteem, and I never spoke in that class ever again. A few months after I had turned 18, my dad came downstairs as I was getting out of the shower to tell me that I was a terrible son and that I had a day to move whatever I needed out of the house. I had to go into work that day and let my boss know what had happened and that I couldn't work that day. I came back and hugged my little brother and sister, packed my shit and left. My dad and I have, sort of, made amends since then, but I'll never be able to get what he said out of my head. My mom told my sister that she doesn't care whether I'm in a ditch dead somewhere. She'd still sleep fine. At first it didn't really hurt me, because we've been pretty distant for some years, but I've just started a family, and with inflation and the pandemic making it difficult to even exist where I am, you'd think she would show some humanity and at least talk to me, or give me some pointers on what I should do to make sure I don't lose my home. But nah, she came into a lot of money when her mother passed away, so I guess as long as she's good, nothing else matters. I hope no matter what, everyone that has been shit on by parents, friends, peers of any kind, are out there doing good for themselves. Black heart. I have been overweight my entire life and my older sister mostly has not. She has, however, had a serious eating disorder because she was so afraid of gaining any weight. Needless to say, weight is a huge issue for my sister. When it comes to other looks, I always thought she was prettier than I, but I have also been told the opposite by more than a few people. I say this because it pertains to what was said. So one night she calls for a ride because she is really drunk and the police were going to take her to jail if someone didn't come pick her up. I went to pick her up, and as I'm driving her home she gets really mad at me. She has a habit of going off the rails and randomly flipping out on people. And starts yelling at me. I told her to clam down and knock it off. She turned in her seat and looked at me with total disgust and said, "If I had to see what you see in the mirror every day, I would just kill myself." No, seriously, if I had to see what you see, I'd do the world a favor and put a bullet in my foo at an inghead. Yeah, good times.